Welcome to the NC Everything Podcast. I'm your host Curtis, and this is the weekly podcast where I talk about everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. If you're new to the show, welcome. I'm glad to have you. And if this is your 76th time listening to my podcast, I'm really glad to have you. I'm glad you've stuck around for this long. Today, and I mentioned this in the last episode, but it didn't quite work out, but today I'm recording for YouTube. I'm new to the YouTube thing, and I'm new to recording myself things, so it's not going smoothly, but hopefully it is going. And kind of like I mentioned in the failed attempt in last episode, the format of the show is going to be a little different because I'm talking to the camera and I'm recording the audio. So if you are watching on YouTube, you'll see this big black thing behind me. That's a window. I recorded a very old house, probably what I assume is a haunted house. Not that has anything to do with it, but this window faces generally east, and the sun comes through here really hard, so that's not really conducive to recording. But that's why you see the big black thing behind me, and there's this right here, this painting here, and there's a globe. This is a spare bedroom, so I wish I was in a recording studio, but maybe one day, maybe eventually. Now, if you are new to the show, this is the part where I say you can go to www.thencEverythingpodcast.com, and there you can listen to all my past episodes, and you can check out the show notes that will include links to any pictures that have whatever to do with each episode. And if you have a suggestion for an episode, or you just want to reach out and say hello, you can do that at the website by clicking the contact button, or www.thencEverythingpodcast.com/contact. And as far as watching it on YouTube, most likely the YouTube channel will be called thencEverythingpodcast.com, but I'll leave a link to the YouTube channel whenever it is formed in the podcast description. And I think that's everything, so I guess let's go ahead and get into the content. Like I said, today we're talking about the Research Triangle Park. Most people around here, maybe most people in the state, only know it as RTP. And if you've never heard of the Research Triangle Park, it's the largest planned research center in the United States. It was created in 1959, but I don't want to jump ahead. I got to do the origin story and get through all that. So let's start with pre-1950. Kind of like I mentioned in the last episode with Kannapolis, around that time, or pre-1950, North Carolina's economy was based on textiles, tobacco, crops, livestock, stuff like that. But during the 1950s, some of North Carolina's leaders, they wanted to switch over to something more progressive. Or not necessarily switch, they didn't want to cancel out some of those older industries, but they definitely wanted to add to it. They didn't want North Carolina's economy based solely on farming and factory work, pretty much. So they were hoping to kind of move away or add to this kind of product line coming out of North Carolina. So that brings me to 1952 and a man named Howard Odum. Now, he was a UNC sociologist, and he was the founder of UNC's Institute for Research in Social Science. Now, he starts pushing ideas around about this cooperative research center where a lot of minds can get together and share ideas and create together. Now, at this time, there was 3 major universities in North Carolina, and that's the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which I'm not going to keep saying Chapel Hill at the end of it, but when I mention UNC, it's the one in Chapel Hill. So you got UNC, you got Duke, and you got NC State. And so Howard Odum's idea was, we'll take scientific minds and brilliant minds from these 3 universities, and we'll kind of put them all together, let them collaborate. Now, in addition to these scientific minds from the 3 universities, they would also be bringing in, the idea was to bring in industry, because not everything in this world is free. So this would be a really cool place to hash out some ideas and be progressive, advance North Carolina, but you also need to make some money. So on top of all this research and stuff going on, they wanted to bring in some industry, to make some money. So now we're in the mid-1950s, and you got three major players here. You got Romeo Guest, and he was a construction executive out of Greensboro. You got Brandon Hodges, and he was a North Carolina treasurer. And you got Walter Harper, and he was the state board. He was on the State Board of Conservation and Development. But we're going to focus on Romeo Guest for a minute. He has a bigger part in this story, I think. He studied at MIT, which is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, if you're unfamiliar. And up there in Massachusetts, Romeo, he had seen the success of university-based industry, and he was hoping to kind of recreate that here in North Carolina. And he was the one who actually came up with the term Research Triangle, because, like I said, UNC is in Chapel Hill, Duke is in Durham, and NC State, or North Carolina State University, it's in Raleigh. And Romeo noticed that these three cities made a triangle, and that's how Research Triangle came to be. So he really took this idea and ran with it all through the 1950s. And one man he talked to, probably one of the most important men, as you'll see later on in the story, was a man named Robert M. Haynes. And he was the president of Wachovia Bank. So now you have Romeo from Massachusetts on board. You got the president of Wachovia Bank on board. But they realized that they're not going to be able to do this unless the government helps them. So they went to the governor. And at this time, the governor was Governor Luther Hartwell Hodges. But they didn't go to the governor to talk directly. They sent a guy named William Newell. Now, William Newell, man, that's a tough one. William Newell, all right, I'm not saying that anymore. This guy was the director of textile research at NC State. Now, he's the one that goes to the governor, and he tells them all about this research idea, and he tells them that he's really endorsing it. And he tells them that they can even call it the Governor's Research Triangle. Now, eventually, Governor Hodges agrees. Maybe that's arrogance. Maybe he saw the benefits of it, but eventually he does get on board, and he's actually one of the biggest advocates of the RTP. And having the governor on board was a real game changer because he's the governor. So he goes around and he gets support from the president of UNC, Gordon Gray, and the president of Duke University, Hollis Edens. And now with all these men on board, you know, the treasurers, the presidents, the governor forms the Research Triangle Development Council. And there's going to be a few committees formed in here, a few groups, and actually the RTP is going to change names a few times before it gets to RTP. So anyway, the governor, he forms the Research Triangle Development Council, and this council, I guess the members of this council are called the Research Triangle Committee. And the Research Triangle Committee was officially incorporated in 1956, just to let you know where we are now. Some of the members of this committee I've already mentioned, but a few other members I need to mention because their name comes back around. William C. Friday. He was the president of the Consolidated University of North Carolina system. And I've mentioned this consolidated system in past episodes. I'm not going to go too far into it, but it's a group of universities. Not all of them have the UNC name, but this growing university group all around North Carolina, they get together. They run independently, but they kind of get together and share ideas, and it's considered the Consolidated University of North Carolina system. I know that's a long name. But this guy, William C. Friday, he was the president of that club. Of course, there's President Edens of Duke University, who I've mentioned. And the foundation hired this guy named George Simpson. He was a sociology professor at UNC, and they made him the executive director of the committee. And they gave him a few cut and dry tasks. Number one, his job was to go out and scout industry and try to get them to come to North Carolina for this research thing. Second, Simpson worked with UNC, Duke, and NC State to try to promote the park. They wanted these colleges on board. So, like I said toward the beginning, there's two things going on here. There's the educational part and the business part. He was handling both. Get business and get education tell them about the park, promote the park, get them to come here. Now eventually Simpson met with well over 200 companies. The problem was, without a physical park in place, nobody was really interested in coming here. You know, he was pretty much asking them to shut down their business, come to North Carolina, but there was nothing really in place. So what was the idea? They'd come here and just say they're here? I mean, so he didn't get anybody on board for this research thing. Eventually, Hodges and Simpson, they go to a guy named Carl Robbins. Now, he's a former textile shareholder. Now, eventually, Hodges and Simpson, they meet up with a guy named Carl Robbins. Now, Carl Robbins, he used to hold a lot of stock in textile in North Carolina, but he sold a bunch of it, and he retired to New York. Now, I don't really know what kind of background he had in development, but Hodges and Simpson go to him, and they tell him they want him to design a development suitable for this research park. Well, Robbins agrees that he'll do it, and Romeo, toward the beginning, Romeo Guest, he gets authorization to go around and purchase as much land as he can in the Raleigh-Durham area. And that actually wasn't too hard because a lot of the land he bought was kind of useless. It was farmland that was swampy, wet, you couldn't do a whole lot with it, and a lot of farmers were glad to sell this useless land off. So they make a little money and they don't have to deal with this crappy property anymore. Now, another thing Robbins did was he hired a company called Pinelands to, I guess, handle the development. The thing was, the president of Pinelands was Romeo Guest. So you see that it sounds a little crooked, I guess, but it's not illegal. You know, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You know, Romeo Guest, he's going to make money either way this way. So now they've purchased land. They got a development company. They're ready to go, right? So they go back to these businesses and they're like, hey, look, we got something here. Come on down. We're ready to go. But it turns out, even with land in hand, a lot of businesses still didn't want to shut their doors and come down here. And another thing was, even though they had started buying land, there really wasn't a lot of land. The money just wasn't there for all this. And, you know, without the business coming in, they really couldn't get the money. So when you need to talk about money, you need a banker. And remember, they already had a relationship with the president of Wachovia, and they meet up with a guy named Archibald Davis. And Davis, he heard their case, he listened to all the details, and he came to a conclusion. They were trying to make this research park, to help the universities, but at its core, they're trying to bring business to North Carolina and, make a little extra money for themselves. So Archibald Davis, he said that was a bad idea. You're not going to be able to do this way. He tells them that instead of trying to make this private profit on the side, you need to make this research park a place for public service. He said, if you do this, then businesses will come. So, make it free and they will come, I guess. But he was right. The governor didn't want to hear this. A lot of those people who've started investing money didn't want to hear this. But eventually, in 1958, they agreed that he was right. And so the would-be profitable Research Triangle Committee changed their name to the nonprofit Research Triangle Foundation. And that guy from Wachovia, Archibald, he must have hit the nail on the head, because over the next 2 months, they were able to raise $1.5 million. They acquired all the land they needed, and the Research Triangle Institute was formed. Now, the Research Triangle Institute, it was kind of like the consolidated university system. So it would be a bunch of different facilities, and each of them having their own management, but they would all work together for the same goal. And it would be their job to conduct research for the government, industry, and business, and the Research Triangle Institute would be the home base for the Research Triangle Foundation. And so, in 1959, the Research Triangle Foundation officially announced the Research Triangle Institute. So the foundation, they got this guy named George Herbert. Now, he was from Stanford Industrial Park out in Palo Alto, California. Well, somehow or another, they lured him all the way to North Carolina, and they made him head of the Research Triangle Institute. And in May of 1959, the Research Triangle Institute, RTI. I'm just going to start saying RTI, but RTI got its first player, and that was the Chemstrand Corporation. They moved up. Chemstrand moved up here from Decatur, Alabama. Now remember Chemstrand because that name comes back toward the end of the episode. Now by the end of 1959, there were 5 companies that were either already located in the Research Triangle area or they were building facilities and getting ready to move there. In 1962, the U.S. Forest Service set up shop in the RTI, and they became the first government entity. Now we're at 1965. And 1965 was a really important year for the RTI. You see, on January 6th, it was announced that a $70 million National Environmental Health Science Center would be built in the Research Triangle Park. And this facility would be built by the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. 3 months after that, another company came in, and they built a 600,000 square foot facility that spread over 400 acres. And this company was called International Business Machines, better known as IBM. Eventually, the RTP gets businesses like the American Association of Textile Chemists and Colorists, Instrumental Society of America, and the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry and Underwriters Laboratory. And that is a really long name. Now, on top of all these other major research facilities coming in, they also had banks, restaurants, and other basic services coming in. So it wasn't just this weird park full of science buildings. Now in 1974, TUCASI was created. Now TUCASI is an acronym for the Triangle University Center for Advanced Studies Incorporated. Now this was pretty much the brainchild of the president of the Research Triangle Foundation, Archibald Davis. He got together with NC State, Duke, and UNC, and they had the idea of building a park within the park. And they wanted to build a facility where people from the 3 universities could all physically come together and collaborate. So to help this TUCASI thing, the Research Triangle Foundation, they built a 120-acre campus inside the Research Triangle Park. Today, the TUCASI campus holds the Microelectronics Center of North Carolina, the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, the National Institute for Statistical Sciences, the Statistical and Applied Mathematics Science Institute, and the Burroughs Wellcome Fund. Now, all that sounds really cool. I have no idea what all of it means. Now, in 1989, one of my actual favorite businesses moved into the Research Triangle Park. Now, keep in mind, I'm not a scientist, so, the science stuff is really impressive. But in 1989, the UNC Center for Public Television moved into the park. And if that sounds confusing, that's UNC TV. And I think every kid in my area grew up watching UNC TV. I actually still watch UNC TV as much as I can. Now, you remember I said the U.S. Forest Service moved into the RTP? Well, by 2000, there were several other federal agencies, and this included the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and the National Center for Health and Statistics. During the early 2000s, the RTP's biggest employers were IBM, GlaxoSmithKline, Nortel Networks, and Cisco Systems. And a lot of you might recognize Cisco. Now today, the RTP is one of the biggest research parks in the country. It's governed by a board of 28 members. 3 of those members are presidents of UNC, Duke, and NC State. The RTP is located on 7,000 acres, and it has 24 million square feet of building space. Within the RTP, there's over 300 companies and over 50,000 employees. And I'm getting close to the end of Research Triangle Park, but I wanted to go over some of the innovations that have come out of RTP. The first one, which I'll admit is one of my favorites, came from Chemstrand. You remember Chemstrand? I said, remember that name? Well, in 1965, they introduced AstroTurf. And just in case any of you don't know what AstroTurf is, it's the fake grass that they put in football fields so they don't have to mow and take care of the grass. I've actually never felt AstroTurf that I know of. but the idea of it sounds really cool. I know when I was a kid, I tried to suggest to my dad that we should put AstroTurf around the whole yard so we didn't have to mow anymore. In 1972, IBM introduced the Universal Product Code, and you know it as a UPC. In 1980, a company called Bell Labs would introduce technology that would eventually go on to help in the mobile phone industry. Now this next one, I don't know if I'll pronounce correctly, but it's important and I want to include it. In 1987, azithromycin, no, that can't be right, azithromycin, also known as zidovudine. Yeah, that was a lot easier. Zidovudine. Anyway, it's an antiretroviral medication used to prevent and treat HIV and AIDS. Anyway, it was introduced by Burroughs Wellcome, which eventually became GlaxoSmithKline. Also in 1987, Duke University introduced this thing called 3D ultrasounds. And I know a lot of you have seen them. I'm not going to post a picture of one, not because it's inappropriate, because these things really creep me out. Now, the idea of a 3D ultrasound sounds really cool, and if you had one and you liked it, I'm glad. But for me, that's the stuff of nightmares. I don't like it at all. We had one. I know at least one of my kids. We had one, and I come from a big family. I've seen a lot of ultrasound pictures, but those 3D ultrasounds are really terrifying to me. In 1989, a company called Cree introduced the first blue LED lights. In 2013, Grayson Clamp became the first child in the U.S. to receive an auditory brain stem implant. And he had this at UNC through a research trial. But when he got this auditory implant, he was able to hear for the first time in his life. In 2013, ViiV Healthcare and GlaxoSmithKline introduced technology that would lead to the first person in the world being functionally cured of HIV. And functionally cured means that he still has the virus, but he doesn't need to take any antiretroviral for it. And one of the coolest things that came out of the Research Triangle Park was the periodic table. Now, it says that there's been several versions of the periodic table that have been created over the years, but the periodic table as we know it today came from RTP. And that's all I have about the Research Triangle Park. I hope you enjoyed it. I know in the last episode I did textiles, and this time I done research. I assure you the next episode is going to be a totally different angle. It's not going to be a building. It's not going to be a town. It's not even going to be people. And I don't want to spoil it, but I look forward to that. It's actually another listener suggestion. Anyway, if you did enjoy the show, don't forget to head over to www.thencEverythingpodcast.com, and you can check out all my past episodes. You can contact me and suggest an episode or just say hello. I also have a gallery on there. I haven't added to it much, but... And if you really want to help the show, the best thing you can do is subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. By doing that, it helps me get discovered and show up on certain lists in podcast players. And you can also follow me on Facebook by searching the NC Everything Podcast on Facebook. And I have a group there. In that group, you don't have to answer a bunch of questions. You can join right up. I also have an Instagram, and that's the_NC_everything_podcast. And I have a Twitter that's @everythingnc. Now, that Instagram and Twitter, I hadn't really been doing a whole lot with it. But if I'm going to do YouTube, I might as well at least do Instagram. And I also have a TikTok. You can search the NC Everything Podcast. Again, I haven't done a whole lot with TikTok, but if I'm going to do YouTube, I probably need to try to make some TikToks. Oh, and one more thing before I go about YouTube. I am going to load all my past episodes on YouTube. It'll be audio only. I might have some kind of picture on there, but that's not for you returning listeners. But I want my whole show on YouTube if I'm going to do it. So I'll have a section for, I guess, non-video episodes or what have you. And that's really all I got. I don't know if you can tell by looking at my face, but I'm getting kind of sleepy. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. It's time for me to get a little more coffee, and so I guess I'll talk to you next time.